All right, we're going to get started on our hidden search form. So in our HTML here, I have my project starter. You can also see I have the font awesome link here because we're going to be using the search icon for the button. So let's change this to hidden search. And then down here in the body, let's create a div with the class of search. And this div is going to wrap both the input and the button. That's really all we have. So let's add the input. I'm going to give this we'll give this a class of input, and the type is going to be text. Let's also add a placeholder. So placeholder will just be search ... and then right after the input we'll have the button, and the button is going to have a class of btn, and inside that button we'll have an I tag with the font awesome icon, so FAS, and FA-search for the icon. So if I save it, we're going to see this, just a regular looking ugly search form. So let's jump into our CSS. Basically what we want to do is have a class of active, and when it's active, the input here will expand and the button will move over, and we want it to start with just showing the button. So let's just get some general styles in here first. As far as the body goes, I want to add a background. Let's say background image, and I'm going to use a linear gradient. So we'll say linear gradient. Let's do a 90-degree gradient, and for colors we'll do the hexadecimal value of 7D5FFF, and let's do hexadecimal 7158E2. Okay, so those are going to be our colors, and we need to put a semicolon here that I forgot. Where am I? Where's my cursor? Okay, so now we have that background gradient. You can probably make this a little smaller here. Okay, that's our background. Now we want to display flex, align everything to the center. We don't need where is it? Flex direction as a column. Height 100 viewports, good. The search class, I'm going to position this relative, so we can position things inside of it absolute, and let's set the initial height here to 50 pixels. And then for the input, that has a class of input. Actually, let's do search input, and let's set a background color of white, and let's set a border of 0, take away any border, and I'm going to make the font size 18 pixels. We'll make that a little bigger, and let's set the padding on this to 15 pixels all around, and we'll set the height to 50 pixels, and let's set the width to 50 pixels. So it's going to start off short like this, but then we'll have an animation or a transition to expand it. So I want to add here a transition on the width property. Okay, so we want the width to have a transition that's going to last 0.3 seconds with an ease effect. Now for the button, let's style that. So that has a class of btn. And we're going to set a background color of white, and let's set a border of 0. We want the cursor to be a pointer when we hover over it. We want a font size of 24 pixels. So remember, this is the button with the icon, and I want to position this absolute within the search class here, search container. And let's say from the top 0 and from the left 0, and then we're gonna give this a height and a width of 50 pixels. Okay, so it puts it right in the middle there. And then I want to transition on this because what we want to do with the button is move it over. We want the input to expand the width. We have the transition for that up here. The button we want to push over. Okay, so the input gets wider, the button gets pushed over. So we'll use transform on that. So we want to add a transition for transform, same amount of time as the width on the input, and an ease effect. Okay, and then we want to get rid of any outline. So let's grab, let's say, the BTN when it's in its focus state, and also the input when it's in its focus state. We want to set the outline to none. Okay, so now we don't see that outline. And then finally we want to take the search input, but when it's active. So the search class, if it has an active class, then we want the input to go to 200 pixels from, what was it, 50? Yeah, so it starts at 50, and then when the search element has an active class on it, then the width will go to 200. And then we also want the button to move over. We have a transition on the transform, but we haven't actually created that yet. So also when the search has the class of active on it, then we want to take the button and we want to set transform, and we want to move it. We want to move it along the x-axis. We want to move it to the right, so we can use translate x. So translate on the x-axis, and we'll move it over 198 pixels. All right. So if I save that, we're not going to see any difference here because we need a little bit of JavaScript to be able to give it that class. And you'll see if I manually put on the active class here, there we go, it expands. So JavaScript's going to be really simple. Let's go ahead and bring in the search. So document dot query selector, and we want to grab the class of search, and then let's also grab the BTN, and then let's grab the input, and then I'm going to take the button, and we want an event listener on that. So we want to add an event listener of a click event, and when we click, we're going to call an arrow function here, and all we want to do is take the search. Remember the search div, which I just showed you. If I put an active class on that, it widens it out, pushes the button over. So that's what we want to do. We want to say from search, we have our class list, and then there's a method called toggle to toggle a class. Basically just add and remove it. So we'll toggle the class of active. I also want to set focus on the input, which we can just use the focus method. All right, so if I go over here and I click, it not only opens it and pushes the button over, widens the input, but it also focuses in there. And if I click, it goes back. And you can see just from the projects we've done so far and some of the ones that we're going to do, a lot of this it's all just putting specific classes through our JavaScript, through events, clicking or hovering over something and making an event fire off where we just add or remove or toggle a class. And then we have a transition to give us a cool little animation. So there's very little need for something like jQuery to do stuff like this anymore. You just use vanilla JavaScript mixed with CSS, and you can do just about any kind of animation that you can do with jQuery pretty easily.